So the next part of getting the Haven ready for sailing is to start thinking about the rigging. And we're going to spend several of the next episodes talking about building the parts for the rigging. So probably the most complicated part are the blocks. So I've been thinking about whether I wanted wooden blocks or bronze blocks. So in order to figure that out, I decided I would make a couple of wooden blocks. So one of the first things that I wanted to know is, why is it called a block and tackle? Well, it turns out that originally all of the blocks were made literally out of a block of wood. So that's why it has the name block. A tackle is the line, or in sailing terms, the sheet that runs through the block. Now you can see I've got two blocks here. One is a double and one is a single. Now the line that I'll be using for the Haven is 5/16 line. So I strung it through here just so you could see how that runs in there. So I think it'd be a good idea to run through the anatomy of a block, as I'll be using some of those terms throughout the build. So the two sides of the block, here and here, are called the cheeks. Now this strap that is running through here, this brass strap, this part here is called the eye. And the part down here at the bottom is called a becket. And that is where another block or a line can be attached to that. The becket is many times an optional thing. Not all blocks need to have a becket on it. The other thing then is the important part on the inside is the sheave. And that is this part where the rope will run through it. Now the opening in here is called the shallow. The top is called the crown, and the bottom is called the tail. In addition, where the axle, or which is called the pin, that runs in there, which we can't see because it's closed up, and here I've put a couple of coins which are actually called tally plates. So I want to talk a little bit more about the sheave. Now the sheave typically is made of wood historically, but you can also get sheaves that are, this one is stainless steel with stainless steel ball bearings in it. So this is certainly a good contemporary option to putting in there. And of course, you can see it is exactly the same size as the sheave that is in there. Now this sheave is 1 1/8 wide, and that is the proper size sheave for a 5/16 line, like I had mentioned earlier. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to turn some wooden sheaves. Now in this case, I'm using black walnut because I have a lot of black walnut scrap laying around. Now one of the things that I do typically is I make a drawing, and you can see I have a drawing here of both the single and double blocks that I made. So I would invite you to take a screenshot of the plans here so that you could make your own if you desire to. So let me show you how I made these two blocks. Now stick around to the end, and I'm going to share some of my thoughts about the challenges of making them and what I would do differently. So to get started, I turn those sheaves on the lathe. I prepared a 1/2 inch thick stock for the shallow spacers and a 3/8 inch thick one for the cheeks. At the router table, I took a 1/2 inch bit and I raised it up 1/16 of an inch in order for that brass strip to fit in there. After cutting a 3-inch section, I then routed a second groove on the opposite side. This way, this piece would be used for the center cheek of the double block. I cut 1/2 inch spacers out of the 1/2 inch stock. So you could stop right here. The blocks are basically shaped. One of the things that I am still thinking is they're still pretty chunky looking. So I'm thinking about relieving the face of this so that the whole thing contours down a little and take a little more material off that. So I'm going to give that a try and see how that looks. So I've got them all finished now and sanded. I really like the way they came out. I think they're a little bit lighter looking, not quite so bulky looking. Now that process of turning that down into a more convex shape was not that simple. So if you don't have experience doing that, I would not suggest doing it. I would leave it with just the relieved edge with the router. Definitely my experience as a sculptor paid off in order to get that in a uniform looking fashion. So the next step now to the blocks is to put the brass strip in here. It's important to have the spacer in the block to maintain the shape of the brass strips. Using a step bit is the most efficient and safest way to drill through thin metal. So for a coin to go into my block, I found a 2000 quarter which is from the state of Virginia, and you can see it has some tall ships on it. So I thought that would be really appropriate to put on that block. Now what I don't like about it is that it is silver in color. So I took this when I practiced, and you can see that I put a brass coating on this quarter. So I think that looks much better. So let me show you how I put this brass coating on the quarter. The first thing I did is I cleaned the quarter really good with some acetone. And so what I'm going to do is to heat it up with a propane torch, like so. And what I have here is a brass brush on the end of my Dremel tool. Now it has to be solid brass or this won't work. So, but what basically happens is by warming it up, then a little bit of that brass gets deposited on there. As a final finish, I used a little brown shoe polish in order to bring out the details in the coins. So what have I learned in making these two blocks? Well, first off, the cost is fairly insignificant. I had to buy the brass strapping here, the 1/2 by 1/16 inch brass. And of course, there's $1 worth of coins on each piece. So all in all, I think probably I did both of these, even if I had to have purchased the wood, for probably around $30. So the other thing about producing them is that they are very labor intensive. I spent far more time on these than I ever had imagined. Now, one mistake that I made was that when I routed around the surface of the cheek, that I should at that time put the brass in there and drilled the hole for the pin. What had happened is because they're convex, that they wanted to roll around, and it was very hard to get them registered on the drill press so that I had a nice straight cut with the drill bit in there. So that's one thing that I would have changed. I like the way they look with that convex shape on there, and I think I would have easily been able to put that on even after the brass strapping had been put through there. So though I really enjoyed this project, I still think they're pretty bulky looking considering the size of the Haven. So in comparison, if we look at a bronze sheave here, and I picked this up when I was out at the wooden boat show last summer, you can see that this bronze one, that the sheave inside is exactly the same size as the sheave on this block. So I think this is probably a more appropriate size for the Haven. So my next step is I'm going to see if I can recreate some bronze blocks for the Haven. So all of that will be coming up in the next episode. So thanks for watching, and remember, if you're going to make it beautiful.